Ladies and gentlemen, it's a real honor to be amongst you today. Some of my greatest food heroes are in the room, some of the people I've followed forever. And if you get a chance, just bump into them. Winona Water, who wrote the book Foodopoly. But let's just think for a minute. For 10,000 years or more, we have been using animals to provide us food in the form of meat, eggs, and milk. And it was doing really well until about 50 years ago. And then we decided that we would want to get all serious about it. So what I'm going to try and do today is to take you to three places. What's broken in our food system? How did it get broken? And then what do we need to do about it? Because I think that's absolutely critical. But I want to make one thing really, really clear. I'm not pounding on farmers. I'm not pounding on people who are farming the way they farm. I'm pounding on how we got here today. So let's take a look at it. Our food system is broken. Why is our food system broken? Well, it's relatively abusive. And it's abusive to our environment. We know that our current food system is polluting our waterways. It's polluting our land. There are huge social costs. We've got workers who are undocumented being injured by the place they work every day of the week. They have no health care. They're being abused. They're being abused because they're being taken advantage of to produce our so-called cheap food. Because there is no such thing as cheap food. It's our body's medicine. Animal welfare. And I don't want to linger upon this too long because the key to fixing our system is to put the animal in the middle of it. But when you have to chop an animal's teeth out, or take its tail off, or chop its beak off to be able to make it sit in a tiny little space no bigger than a sheet of paper, there is something inherently wrong with the system design. And something we did, and we did this to fix a broken system. We took an amazing drug and we started to feed it at subtherapeutic levels in order to treat diseases that we made. Agriculture brought those diseases about, and we've now brought a new disease. We now have a bacteria that is resistant to antibiotics. And a far more intelligent human being than me will tell you all about this. We're going to listen to Lance Price in a minute, and he gets the subject in a way I've never seen anybody get it. And the culmination of this, ladies and gentlemen, is we are destroying our planet very, very slowly and inexorably. I stand before you as somebody who did not take care of their body and is just trying to. And it's an interesting road. I'm cutting out sugars, so I'm really grumpy right now. But, you know, my doctor said I need to get rid of them, so Doc, I've cut out the sugars. So let's see how we got here. So we had a lady called Celia Steele, and this is just one example, and she was on the Delmarva Peninsula, and she was mistakenly delivered 500 chickens instead of 50. And she raised those chickens and she sold them for meat, and she made a great deal of money. But something happened. She tried to do it all year round, and she started to take the chickens indoors. And here we come to our first unintended consequence, our first mistake. When she took her chickens indoors, they had something called leg weakness. In humans, we know it as rickets. It's a vitamin D deficiency. And we had two decisions to make at this moment in time. And here are two decisions. We leave our chickens out on pasture where they synthesize vitamin D themselves, or guess what we did? We did this. We fed them cod liver oil and lately synthetic vitamin D so that we could take these chickens inside. And you can see there's an unintended consequence to what, as a farmer or scientist or a system designer, let's get them in, let's feed them synthetic vitamin D, we can make these chickens stay alive. But there's another unintended consequence to this. We start to get bacterial infections. And for those of you that don't know, I talk about poo an awful lot. Yep, chickens are coprofecal. They eat their own poo. So when their tummies start to build these bacteria, they poo out bacteria. And Lance will tell you, they ingest it again, and they've got a lovely warm tummy, and it's 96 degrees and humid where the chickens live, and they're a bacteria factory. So what happened? Well, an amazing Scottish man, Alexander Fleming, discovered penicillin. And agriculture went, we're broke again. Thousands of chickens are dying, mortality 20 to 30% in the flocks. Let's use this solution to bacteria in man and try it on animals. So they did, and it worked. But if you listen to Bob Lawrence and Bob Marding at Johns Hopkins, they'll tell you bacteria in a chicken's tummy is balanced. So it works well, rather like ours. And I think we've got about 11 pounds of active bacteria in our stomachs, doing all really good things, but not making us sick. So using the antibiotics to treat the diseases, the side effect was the chickens grew faster because they were able to process the food more easily. But you can see now the unintended consequence, because Fleming said in his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech, one day an ignorant man will underdose himself or misuse that antibiotic. And I paraphrase, in 1946. It's 2014 and we still haven't listened to him. I believe we're ignorant men. We have to take notice of the man that discovered the drug. This isn't just true of chickens. In beef cattle, we have something called respiratory disease or respiratory illness, and it's caused by standing hundreds of thousands of cattle on dry feedlots where they inhale dust and they become sick. And guess what we do? We open the gates and we let them into big grass fields and we give them lots of water. Make sense? Because that'll make them better. No, we bring our old friend out, antibiotic, we give them a low dose, that stops them becoming sick. And we're doing this all in the name of cheap food. But this is expensive food. I have no idea how much it's going to cost us to deal with antibiotic resistance. But here's a staggering number. FDA 2011, 7.7 million pounds of antibiotics to treat humans. Look at that number for animals, 29.9 million pounds of antibiotics being used to treat animals that we made sick. Because we made them sick by designing the systems we asked them to live in. And they're not designed to live in those systems. Let's look at the other unintended consequence of our feeding system. We feed these animals corn. We feed them grain. Well, boys and girls, a cow is a ruminant. It eats grass. It's not designed to eat grain. We grow our grain, 95% of it, using GM production. The net result of GM production is we have resistant weeds. We have runoff. We have poisoned waterways. We have pesticides and herbicides. And then the most sickening of all, we don't have enough room, so we're now chopping down rainforests. The unintended consequences of industrial agriculture. We feed these animals high-density rations. They can only use so much of it to grow. They can only use so much of it to make meat or eggs. The rest of it ends up here, in these delightful slurry lagoons, as they're called. Lagoon. Remember Blue Lagoon? Yeah, this is Blue Lagoon, but it's kind of gray, black, full of heavy metals, arsenicals. And feedlots aren't alone. They've now decided they can put their poo into water and then spread it around that way. It's easier to move poo if you liquefy it. Liquefaction, it's a great phrase, but you can move it far more quickly. The problem happens, though, is when we spread this on our land, because you think that nitrogen and phosphorus are really good things for plants, but only in the right amount. Too much and the plants will wither and die. North Carolina is running out of land to spread the poo that they create in the hog farms so that they can farm on it. We're killing our farmland, and that is another unintended consequence of our industrial system. Let's just look a little bit here at the Chesapeake Bay, and I think it's important, it's local, it's where we are, and for those of you watching across the globe, I apologize that we're very American-centric, but it is what it is. Look at the amount of nitrogen and phosphate coming out of our intensive poultry units. Where does this go? Well, the first place it goes is on the fields, and that's, as a farmer, a really good idea. We need to fertilize our fields. But when we put too much of it on and the rain falls down and it goes into our streams and tributaries, this is where it goes. Look at those red areas. Look at those dead zones. And this is another unintended consequence of the way we farm. And it all started with vitamin D. We made this decision to overcome what nature was telling us. And what nature was telling us is don't put chickens indoors. Big message, don't do it. Not a good idea. Galeas, jungle fowl, lives at the end of marginal land, pops out, eats, go back. Should be a privilege food. When I grew up, my grandmother would have a chicken once a month. That's all she could afford. And we'd eat the thing for about 3 weeks, and I hated it. But it was a privilege food. Now I can buy a 10-pack from a certain big store, and I can put it on there, and I have that for lunch, and I have another 10-pack at night. I don't anymore, honestly, but I could if I wanted to. And it's not just the Chesapeake Bay. Look at this. This is the Gulf of Mexico. But look at the size of it. It's the size of Texas. And I used to live in Texas. It's a great state, but it's huge. That red area, nothing grows. There's no oxygen. That's coming from Kansas, by the way, and all the way down. That's coming out of the Midwest. And that's a result of us planting soy to feed to cattle. Unintended consequence. This is a picture, and recently I've had the privilege to work with some great chefs. We took this from an airplane flying a chef over feedlots to make sure that he doesn't put them on his menu. Okay? There's 100,000 cattle here somewhere. Anyone see a blade of grass? Anybody see anything remotely that looks like it's attached to a ruminant? No, we're feeding them grain, and then we're feeding them antibiotics because we're feeding them grain. We are in an absolute end game situation. We have to change. We have to redesign. Our system is broken. We have to fix it. Is this the kind of farming we want? Or is this the kind of farming we need? Pasture is known to sequester carbon. Pasture-based animals are known to have less negative fats. Pasture-based production is known to avoid the use of antimicrobials, antibiotics, because the animals are healthy. Stress is an immunosuppressant. Pigs can practice natural behaviors. They don't need their tails cut off or their teeth cut out in order to live on pasture. They're really good at it. And let's go full circle to this young person. Chicken is not a meat that we can eat every day. It has to come back to being a meat we eat irregularly. It fights us for food resources. It fights us because we can synthesize grain better than a chicken. And in finishing, I'd like for us all to put our hands together for a group of people who aren't here. And they're going to be working really, really hard in the next 24 hours as these storms come in. Let's give a big round of applause to our sustainable farmers across the country and across the globe as they try and fix this mess.